Dan?
Okay,
And
my name is Dan Goldstein. I am not a tech person. I had the great honor of representing the National Federation of the Blind from 1986 until 2017 when I retired. And what we're presenting today started as my retirement project with a gigantic assist from IAAP and Pina in particular. Pina, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. So my name is Pina Dintino. I am representing the International Association of Accessible Professionals today in this project. I am also an independent consultant. I am a person with lived experience. I am visually impaired. And I guess the takeaway from my experience in working with accessibility for more than 20 plus years now is that you never retire from accessibility. And Dan is a perfect example of that. So what we want to talk to you about today is in fact Dan's little project, which has turned into reality. We call it the Business Accessibility Criteria Program. It is a program that is hosted on the International Association of Accessibility Professional homepage and programs, list of programs. And this program is, which Dan will give us a bit of more of a background, but it was really, is really about bringing together the disability community and businesses. And there are a lot of resources out there, as we all know, that can help organizations, that can help, with tools that can help us guide when we're developing plans and so on and so forth. But one of the things that, we often see is a separation between what the disability community says versus what the business community says. The language between the two is sometimes so nebulous that they just don't understand or hear each other. So that's kind of one of the gaps that we were trying to address with this product. So today it's really about, we want to give you a demo, kind of talk you through the program, and open it up to you to kind of give us your perspectives, your thoughts, and we want to make it as interactive as possible. But let's start by turning back to Dan, and Dan's going to talk a little bit more about how all this came about.
So in 2016, I was invited to do the keynote at CSUN. And it was, I think, the 34th annual CSUN conference. And I think I was invited because they were celebrating the fact that this pain in the neck was going to be retiring. But I stopped and thought, what in tech takes 34 years? Nothing. I mean, Wernher von Braun went from lobbing V2 rockets at London to putting a man on the moon in much less than 34 years. Why are we operating so slowly in the development of accessibility when tech moves so quickly? So I started thinking about what had changed and what tools maybe we didn't have that we needed. And one thing that had changed was I was hearing from digital accessibility consultants that they weren't having to make the business case so much, that businesses understood why they should want to be inclusive and accessible, but were not necessarily understanding what they should do. And it occurred to me, if a CEO says to an architect, I want to build a green headquarters, what do I need to do? The architect's got an easy answer. There's this thing called the LEED standard, and it's got silver that consists of bop, 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 and it's got gold that has da, 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 and platinum, so on and so forth. But if a CEO had walked up to me and said, Dan, I want to be fully inclusive and accessible to people with disabilities as my customers, as job applicants, as employees, and in my emergency planning, that last category is stimulated by COVID, what exactly do I need to do? There wasn't a go-to answer, right? The ADA, with the exception of the architectural guidelines, is about what not to do. Or if it is what to do, like reasonably effective, equally effective communications, it's such a broad category as to not give you guidance. And it occurred to me, the answer to this question, needed to come from the disability community, to be authentic, to accurately reflect what the disability community wants. So I sat down with NFB, National Federation of Blind, National Association of the Deaf, Autism Self-Advocacy Network, National Center for Independent Living, United Spinal, the ARC, Bazelon Center, et cetera. And I said, can we come up with specific determinable statements of what it is that you want? And we ended up with about 200 statements. And IAAP heard about what I was doing and said, you're going to need a website. You're going to need to train consultants. You're going to need webinars. You're going to need to market this thing. And said, we'd like to be the home for it. And I said, that's great. Of course, you'll have no control over the content of the program. That will be exclusively in the hands of disability rights organizations to decide what gets modified, what gets added, what gets subtracted. And to their tremendous credit, IAAP said, okay. And that, since that time, working with Pina and a host of very talented people, we finally got to the point that we have a program to present.
Yes. Absolutely. So as Dan mentioned, there's almost 200 criteria or statements that have been developed as part of this program. And we decided to separate these criteria into categories so that it makes it easier, but also categorize them aligned with business processes. So we have 3 main categories, but within that there are 14 different topics that we have housed in this program. And as I said, things like, we're going to talk about leadership, and there's things like design and develop. We have criteria around human resources, for instance, and as well as AI. So there's 14 different topics that sort of cover an organization across its entity. The thing about what's also important, as Dan mentioned, this is a living document. This is a living program. We know it's not an encompassing all program. It's going to require continuous updates and changes as technology changes, as business priorities change. And so this is why we want to make sure that, you folks, as well as the community, stays engaged in this process. So let's dig a little bit deeper into it. We'll do a bit of a demo, and then we'll open it up for kind of, more conversation.
So I'm going to go to the Navigator tool now.
So, yes. So first of all, for those of you, this is, as Dan said, this is an IAP program, so you have to log into IAP. You have to be, at this time, a member of IAP to access it. And so once you log into IAP, you can select the Business Accessibility Criteria Program, and it will take you to the home page. And the first thing that you're going to see on the home page is a bit of a description, and you'll have 3 categories to choose from. The first one is what we call the fundamentals. We know, talking to businesses, if you don't have these fundamental things addressed, it is extremely difficult to sustain accessibility. So we talk about leadership, as I mentioned before, but policies, very, very important. Engagement of persons with disabilities. If you don't have those things, addressed at the very beginning of your journey, then you may have a hard time to sustain it long term. The second category is assets and tools, and these are all the things like, your tools, what are you using, and what standards are you following, what practices are you following? And the next category is about people, and this is all about your communication, your training, for instance. How do you engage, again, effectively in order to make sure that alternate formats are provided to people, and so on and so forth. So, and then, as we go through each of these, you'll find some subcategories. I think one of the important things I want to say before we get started is that this is not meant to be a checklist. And we see a lot of people asking for checklists. That's the easy way out, right? You have a checklist, you check, 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 we're done. Oh, now accessibility is done. Well, accessibility is never done, we all know that. And so this is one of the reasons why this is not a checklist. This allows you to kind of start your process depending on where you are in your organization or your practice, and it takes you across the process through guidance, through guided resources. So Dan, I'm wondering if we can take a look maybe at one of the categories,
Sure.
and you can walk us through it,
Let's see. How about design, develop, and test?
which we would find that under the tools and assets. So why don't we take a look at the 14 categories
What am I
first?
doing?
Let's
Okay.
see, what are the 14 categories we have?
Oh, you want me to do criteria or categories? I'm confused.
The topics, sorry, topics.
Okay, let me go back then.
Let's go back to topics. Let's take a look at the 14 topics that we have. So
Okay.
if you click on fundamentals, then
So
you have the
in
list.
fundamentals, you've got leadership and accountability. I'll just add a comment there. One of the things I learned early on when companies were struggling to make their websites accessible was they didn't seem to realize that if you don't put accessibility responsibilities into job descriptions and performance reviews, it doesn't get done. And so there are things like that, and the need to make reporting go up to the top as it does with financing, going up to the C-suite. Those kind of things are in that category. Engagement and outreach to disabled people. This is really a prompt to remember that's where you start whatever you're going to do on accessibility and inclusivity. Policy planning, management, and capacity building, and measurement data collection and feedback. You have to know the impact of what you're doing to know whether it's working or not. Assets and operations criteria group includes AI, design, develop, and test, which we're going to look at in a minute, procurement, facilities, and emergency planning and disaster recovery. And then the people criteria group, customer and employee accommodations, communications, events, HR, and training. And those are the 14 categories at present. And obviously, we don't expect any company to charge in and say, we're going to do all 200 criteria. That would be lovely. But at the end of the day, really, if we get them working on one or two or three groups, then accessibility and inclusivity is going to be in their DNA from there on out, right? And then maybe they come back and they say they want to do more.
That's right. So let's take a look at design as an example. We know that there are a lot of people here at this conference who are involved in design and development, and this one really touches on the entire life cycle of a product or a program. So let's see what we find under design and development and planning.
Okay.
And testing, sorry.
So this is broken down into build as a subtopic, test, and development life cycle. And so I'm going to pick as an example, develop 3, which reads, sorry, I have to scroll down. Before the initial release or major change to its product, services, technology, and facilities, the company establishes a written process for requiring an authorized person to certify that accessibility requirements have been met. This one was probably prompted by the early IBM experience where product release, a manager had to certify that it was accessible before the product would be released.
So when you click on that criterion, what you're going to see in the tool are related criterion, or related criteria, right?
Yep.
So if you click on that,
You get one more criteria. The company follows a written process including an inclusive and rigorous design and testing protocol which ensures all newly released goods and services are accessible to all users. Limited exceptions may be allowed in the absence of an accessible alternative with written senior management approval stating the justification for the exception, how disabled employees and customers will be accommodated, and plans for addressing accessibility needs.
and the idea here is, it brings it back to what we said before, is that yes, you need a policy, yes, you need a process, but if all of that does not tie back to accountability, in the sense that if you're not going to make it accessible for whatever reason, who's managing the risk? Who's taking responsibility for it? Or who is, on the other hand, saying that it is accessible and confirming that it is? And so this is kind of like what the program kind of asks you and promotes the questions to be asked as you go through it, right? And I think that in addition to that, now we can tap into resources that can help you kind of identify how that is done, right? So you now also, I don't know if they should be loaded by now.
They are, but with the interesting heading that
Yep.
says unknown type.
Interesting, okay.
So I don't know what that means. Let's try a different criterion for
Sure,
now.
let's try a different criterion.
And what we'll do,
So does that make sense to you all? Or are we going too fast?
and please feel free to interrupt, by the way.
There's a question over there.
Yes,
We need a
ma'am.
mic. Wait, we need the mic.
Oh, yeah, I can run it over.
Sorry. I need to stand next to Barry.
Just given what you were just saying about accountability, I saw earlier on the page there was a tab for roles and responsibilities.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could talk about the relationship of the roles and responsibilities tab to what you were just saying. A minute ago.
Yes, we will get to that.
Oh, I brought it up. There's
Sure? Okay.
facilities managers, technology managers, and web managers are identified as the folks with roles and responsibilities with respect to this particular criterion.
Yeah, so for each of the criterion, we kind of tagged which roles that we're aware of might be affected by this or might take responsibility, to take this action and make it real, right? So that's the thing. And it will be different for many organizations. And in some cases, a person may have multiple roles, right? I mean, we see this a lot with smaller companies who the designer is also the developer and is also the tester, right? We've tried to identify who would be responsible for that criteria within the organization. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So I'm going to pick another criterion, looking for develop 9. Here we go. The company addresses functional requirements for disabled people and individuals, applicable accessibility standards in requirements documentation.
So if you've worked in a large organization, if you've worked with companies who have to have all these long documents when they develop a product, any of you? Yeah, maybe? One of the biggest gap that we found is that very frequently there are no functional requirements or no accessibility requirements at the beginning of the process, at the beginning of the design and development process. And so what then happens is that, people continue to develop, and then, you find out in testing that things are not quite working quite the way you expect them, or it's not working for a specific segment of the population. So what this is really saying is make sure that when you're doing your requirements document, those functional requirements, those accessible functional requirements are very clear, that they're very defined, they're defined nicely at the beginning of the process, so that they're not forgotten, they're not done later. And I would be surprised if we click on that, we don't have something that sort of leads us to engagement possibly. If you
Yes.
click on that, right?
If you go down to related criteria,
Yep,
engagement, not outreach to disabled individuals,
right.
and you get Engage 8, the company provides a role for disabled individuals to contribute their diverse perspectives to planning and requirements definition activities for development and procurement.
So what this is saying is, if you're going to do this, which we want you to do, also make sure that you engage with persons with disabilities to help you define those requirements, right? Because they're going to be the ones who are actually going to let you know how they're going to use the product or how they're going to interact with the product. And therefore, if you're engaging them up front and throughout, then you have a better chance of having a product that is accessible, and it'll cost you less because you won't have to remediate it, right?
So it's, I think, quite possible that this is not a revelation to anybody in this room. So why is it useful? It's useful because in talking to the client, you can say, look, this is what the disability community is asking for, and guess what? It's going to save you a ton of money and engineering time. And then you tell them a little horror story, like how when Google developed Android, their first design decision was to use WebKit, and in doing so, they made the decision to be inaccessible, and then spent 10 years developing a product that's not nearly as good as if it had been born accessible, but kind of can be used, by blind people.
Yeah.
So again, I'm not sure that any of you were going, I never thought of that, but this helps support you in talking with the client about why this needs to be done.
Yeah. And how, and again, it goes back to that accountability, right, Dan? It's making sure that people understand what they need to do based on their roles, right?
Right. And then there's a ton of resources for this particular criterion that you can see up on the screen. I'm not going to try to read them all.
Yeah. And these resources have been vetted by subject matter experts to help you, as I said, to guide you through the process. We do encourage and we do want more resources to enrich this program, to continue to enrich this program. So if you have best practices, if you have resources that we have not identified as part of our research, we'd like you guys to submit it. There is a submission form on the program on IAP, and we will vet it through the group that we have, a vetting community, and then they get added, right? Okay.
All right. Do you want me to pick procurement or accommodations next?
What do you guys want? Procurement or accommodation? Any preference? Procurement? Oh, accommodations?
All right, we'll do a little bit of both.
Okay, let's do, which one are we doing first then?
Procurement.
Let's do procurement first. Okay,
And we'll start with procurement 5. The company follows a written process to evaluate proposals against its accessibility standards and requirements and gives preference to solutions that support the highest levels of accessibility.
why is this important? Why is this statement important? Because many companies will select or prioritize based on cost, right? The upfront cost, not thinking about what the overall cost might be if it's not accessible, or the risk, or the legal exposure, or, right? So what we're saying here is put some priority on those products that are most accessible, and if you're working in Title II, right? That's a requirement nowadays, right? You've got to make sure that what you procure, government money, is spent on accessible products and services. But if you don't have a policy, you can't hold anyone accountable to it. Okay?
So another one is Procure 6. I'm not skipping to the page that has the related criteria on these, because I want to start hearing from you guys. But
Yeah, absolutely.
when procuring third-party services, to design, configure, develop, integrate, deploy, maintain, host, and support ICT. The company follows a written process to validate contract deliverables for conformance to its applicable accessibility standards and requirements. If you don't have a way to measure what they're telling you is accessible, and be sure that they're doing what's promised, it's not going to work.
Exactly. Any of you familiar with the voluntary application, the VPAT? Yeah. VPAT, right? How many of you feel like the VPAT is a good evidence of accessibility? No, right?
Right.
Right?
I used to say that a librarian should file VPATs under science fiction in
Yes.
the library. Yes, sir.
VPAT as a tool is a good tool. The
Yeah.
problem is nobody fills them out correctly, and not that many people know how to interpret what they're saying to understand that they're not being filled out correctly.
You're right, absolutely right. And I think the other thing too is that many VPATs are filled out by the company that makes the product, and sometimes they don't engage persons with disabilities to help them fill out and assess their accessibility properly to report it on the VPAT, right? I think that's another issue that we deal. So when we're saying, as part of what the community is saying, make sure, get evidence that these products are accessible before you commit to purchasing them, right? Let them show you, let them demonstrate it to you, get some testimonials. Do more than just, quote unquote, using the VPAT as your evidence to ensure that the tool and product is accessible, right? And so again, there you'll have related criteria on how to do it, and you'll have resources to guide you to understand what a VPAT is.
And so if the folks whose job it is procurement aren't trained in accessibility, they're not going to be able to successfully acquire employee-facing software that's accessible. So one of the first criteria in this area, the company provides training to staff involved in the procurement process on how to communicate accessibility requirements to vendors, evaluate proposals, validate conformance claims, monitor ongoing conformance, and deal with accessibility issues that arise throughout the life of the contract. So when Pina said this isn't a checklist, what this is, oh, we need to do this. That helps you helps your client to understand, oh, this is a piece too of what a successful procurement process is going to look like. And somewhere in here, I'm not quite sure where it is, but there's one that whenever a software is updated, you check again.
You check and again through your agile, your change management process, right?
Right, because we've all seen that happen.
Yeah.
When it's broken with the update.
Dan, this one about training for procurement team, I want to say though, I get the pushback. I speak to a lot of ICT procurement or people, or just general procurement people in general, and they'll say, well, it's not my job because my specialty is procurement. I know procurement policies. I don't need to know about ICT accessibility, as an example, right? So I think that I think it's important for procurement, or they'll put a general statement in their contracts that basically says, my product meets WCAG standards, as an example, and just they get that statement from somewhere, but they don't understand what that statement means, or is it too broad, or is it too specific, whatever it is. It's really about making sure that the procurement team has some basic understanding, or has a process to know where to go to get the information as to how to validate that procurement statement, right? Okay.
And the related criteria in this particular area are, I think, very interesting because they lead you to criteria in artificial intelligence, policy planning, management, engagement, and outreach to disabled individuals, and into emergency planning. Again, oh dear, what did I do? I just lost the screen.
Uh-oh.
Here we
You
go.
stopped sharing.
Okay. No, I didn't stop sharing. I somehow minimized it when I didn't
Okay.
mean to.
Okay.
And the related resources are substantial. And the first one is the really good toolkit that Larry Goldberg built for Disability In on accessible criteria. Excuse me, accessible procurement. So that's an example of that. And then I think we were going to look
At
at
accommodations.
accommodations.
So the person who asked about, let's look at procurement, I don't know if she's still in the room. Does that answer your question? Does that kind of give you a sense of what we're trying to address? Yeah?
Okay.
Okay, let's look at accommodation. Someone asked about accommodations. Let's look at So accommodation, I believe, is split into customer accommodations and employee accommodations, if I remember correctly, Dan?
They are, but they actually go further than that because they also reflect accommodations for job applicants.
Yes.
It just became too cumbersome a title. And here you're talking about not just digital accommodations, but physical accommodations as well. And invisible accommodations. For example, the company follows a flexible leave policy that supports the needs of disabled people for a sustainable work environment. If you suffer from PTSD and there are days when you simply can't make it out the door, there needs to be a work environment that allows you to do that. One of the few that's specific, I think, to a disability, and there are some, the company ensures relieving areas for guide dogs and other certified assistance animals are identified and easily available. I misread that. The company ensures relieving areas for guide dogs and other certified assistance animals are identified and easily available. I think one of the most important ones here is one that requires that or suggests that the budgeting for accommodations is central, not charging the cost of accommodations to a particular business unit, which is something we fought for when we sued Social Security years ago, because you had these ghettos. All the deaf employees were in record review, and all the blind employees were in customer service, phone stuff. That's because nobody wanted to take on the cost of accommodations charged to their unit. Who had the question about accommodations?
The gentleman up in
In
the front,
front,
I
yes,
believe.
sir.
Yes.
I would just raise my hand to listen about that.
Do you want? Are there any in particular you would like?
Certainly, I agree with the centralized cost center, because I've dealt with some accommodation requests being rejected simply because my department did not want to handle the costs.
Right.
So, we've been working really hard on changing our accommodation process at the company I work for.
Well, and in that context, one of the problems is that your manager is probably not an expert on accommodations. And so one of the criteria provides that, there are really two together. The company allows direct supervisors to grant but not deny reasonable accommodations. And then the necessary consequence of that, the company follows a written process which provides for automatic escalation of ungranted accommodation requests. So it goes up the chain until you get to somebody who's knowledgeable about these things. Yes, sir.
I'm waiting for the mic.
Oh,
Sorry, here we go.
That's okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. The other thing about centralizing is that oftentimes an employee does not want to disclose to their manager that they have a disability because of the stigma associated with disabled people being inferior or of lesser quality, or other, things that are just systemic of our society. And so by centralizing it, we find that moving the request to an HR person or to someone not associated with your individual working environment, your department, is often beneficial as well.
I think that's exactly right. And one of the issues with invisible disabilities is that, if you're hired as a blind person, you're hired as a deaf person, probably HR tells you about how accommodation requests are handled in that company. But they're not going to say it to anybody with an invisible disability. So we have a criterion, Accommodate 2, that reads, the company communicates to all employees its policies and procedures for requesting and managing accommodations.
Yeah, and I think it's important, right, as you said, not everyone will disclose, not everyone will feel comfortable. And so trying to make it as, as anonymous as possible, I think is the way to go. As we said, we realize some companies may not have a need for all of these criteria, but these are things they need to think about. They need to really consider as they go through their processes. And if not have policies, it really does raise that awareness for them to, you should be thinking about this.
I'm going
right?
to take the mic over here.
Just because you're talking about disclosure, I saw that one of the criteria is about surveying your community with disabilities. And I work at a college, and one of the things that, what's a community college, first of all, we have a population that's changing all the time, right? So we don't have a very stable population. And second of all, we see that our students are less and less likely to disclose, right? And so I just wanted to kind of see, I mean, since the expectation that students have now is that everything be accessible, we have deaf students who do not disclose, right, when they enroll in a course, because they're expecting that everything be appropriately captioned, and they don't need anything, right? So they don't go to our disability support services. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on how folks not disclosing kind of intersects with the surveying, right? Question. Yeah.
Bina, you want to try your hand at that? Oh, sorry.
Thank you. And that's a very interesting situation. We just did some work with a university, and we came across that same kind of conversation. And sometimes it's not necessarily about the data I've disclosed as a person with a disability. This is really about, first, two things. One is making the process open enough so that people don't feel they have to identify as a person with disability if they need something, right? I mean, I'll tell you, after I lost my sight 25 years ago, for the first few years, I did not identify as a person with disability. I felt that there was no reason for everybody to know that I was visually impaired, right? That I was blind. I wanted things to be accessible. I didn't want to check that box that said, I identify as a person with disability. So I get that, and I think with this generation that is coming beyond me, at least, don't feel that they have to disclose, that they have a right to accessible education, they have a right to inclusive education and services, products, and whatnot. I think the other point is, how do we collect data? Data can be collected in the way we deliver services, how many devices we purchase, how many, how things are used. We use this we can use this multi-factoring algorithm to find out, if we're doing a good job, if they're happy, if we're meeting the expectations. So it doesn't necessarily, if you're going to have a process that says, we want to disclose because, like in Canada, we have an Equity Act that we have to report on how many people with disabilities you hire, right? It's an act, it's still there, it's not gone yet. And so for those particular situations, you know, we have to collect that data, but there are different ways of collecting that data that does not mean you have to disclose. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
I had a comment. See who gets to me first. Me to the mic? Dina. So, sorry. Halfway, exactly. Yeah, just one concept toward that, and I'm sure you've thought of it, is having a culture of open accessibility, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't take disclosure, doesn't take a doctor's statement, doesn't take all of these hoops that you've got to go through. I'm just, you know, I would just like something to help me concentrate on my computer screen. That's it. You don't have to say why or anything. But that is not how it's been. So that's actually a big leap, and I think a big cultural leap for organizations to be able to do that. So, thank you.
Yeah, and I think particularly in the education, it's a risk thing, right? Organizations feel you have to disclose so that they can mitigate risk. But to your point, David, I agree. I agree that it should be based on what do I need to be successful? What are the functional requirements that I need to be successful, right? And that's what it should be based on. And I don't know about here in the US or other countries, but I know back home, getting a medical letter or reference or whatever, right, is brutal. We don't have, many of us don't even have doctors, family doctors to go to, right? So getting a referral from a doctor to say, and the doctor doesn't know your devices. The doctor doesn't know how you're going to interact with things. So I think we need to change the culture. We need to really understand this is not necessarily a medical issue, right? It is a productive issue and an efficiency issue. Yep.
Can I add something?
Yeah, I was gonna
Sorry. Go ahead, David.
Okay, let's meet where we did last time. Okay. Yeah, recently I've been working with an organization developing it's AI-based job accommodation tool, right? And so there are a number of shifts, mental shifts, I think, that I had to help lead them through. But one of the latter components was, again, how does somebody get an accommodation, right? And so we were pushing toward the person simply, one of the first things in the tool is a person says, I'm having trouble with this, or I want this, right? As opposed to going through all of the myriad of disabilities related to job accommodations, and even that we went to a functional level, and it's still a hierarchy that gets quite complex. So ask the person first, right? But again, that's not in the culture. You know, it makes it tough. So, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, and I want to apologize by those on Zoom. Apparently, the Zoom Workplace is reconnecting. I hopefully eventually will. Oh, that's right, I have a microphone. What I was just going to add was that when companies do more outreach to the disability community, they start to get more comfortable, and the significance of what the disability is and its diagnoses and blah, 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 starts to reduce in significance. And the flip side to that is in companies big enough that they have employee resource groups or affinity groups, having the C-level engage with those groups accomplishes the same thing and takes away, because part of the issue always with disclosing your disability is the stigma, some of which you may have internalized yourself.
Yeah. and I think that's, again, go back to that cultural shift. We're used to having medical models, regardless of how we say we are moving toward a social model. We still have those medical requirements, and most of it because of people want to mitigate, organizations want to mitigate their risks. Know that they've done everything they do by fear that, they don't get sued, right, or taken to court. And I think we have to kind of we still have a lot of work to do in balancing that move from medical to social and functional. But hopefully we'll get there, right? How is it in universities? Are you folks are you seeing that shift, or are you still strongly based on the medical model? Anybody?
I can take the mic over there.
Yeah.
Here.
There
Oh,
you go.
sorry.
I think it depends on whether we're talking about our students or our employees, right? Because we have two different sets of accommodations. And I think it's still, my experience is with employees, it's still a medical model, but it's really changing with students because students, there's so many of them, they change us very quickly, right? They're the driving force for change. And so that's what I was talking about before. Students really, and especially our population at a community college, right? We have students of every generation, every background. We have tons of international students. And so we often find that, so I'm from Maryland, a third of our students have disabilities, and that is very, very underreported, right? That's with a lot of students not disclosing their disability. So it is changing with our students. It's not necessarily changing with our employees.
So let me add one comment about colleges and this program. Okay, I seem to.
Reconnect. I can start it if you'd like. Okay.
Well, let me just finish that thought, and then I'll get reconnected to the Zoom because we seem to be starting from scratch. This program has criteria that a higher education can use, but it's not designed for that purpose. There are tremendous considerations that aren't addressed here. One is time. If you don't get your accessible materials until the second week of the semester, you're no longer getting to compete on a level playing field. In a company, presumably, somebody in the CTO's office is making a decision about what software is going to be procured. But the chief technology officer at a college is probably not deciding whether the French department's going to use Duolingo or Rosetta Stone, certainly not deciding whether the alumni office software for ordering transcripts is going to be this product or that product. It's balkanized. And responsibility is diffuse. And finally, there are always going to be, well, not finally, but there are always going to be faculty members who think that having to provide accessible class notes in advance of class is an infringement on academic freedom. Not quite sure why, but I've heard that excuse a lot. But there's also the fact that if it's a residential college, you need to consider whether the washers and dryers are accessible, whether at the cafeteria you can access the balance of your account, all of those kinds of considerations. Yeah. So I'm 77, so this is a very conditional promise, but I'm hoping you're gonna, we're the, what are we called? Goldstein. Yeah.
So basically, we tried to make the criteria as agnostic as possible. As you
I'm a
go through
lefty.
it, you'll find out, you'll see that we don't say thou must have policies that align with WCAG 2.0, 2.2, whatever it is. We tried to keep it as agnostic as possible. And as Dan said, we really did, while this was really a focus on
Pina Dentino,
organization
that didn't show up either.
and businesses,
We're in the
We-
afternoon now.
oops, sorry.
I'm sorry, we're just trying
We're really trying to develop additional criteria that will reflect the educational sector. So that's definitely, but we needed to launch. We needed to, we needed to get to a point where, after piloting this with a number of different companies, we wanted to launch what we have and continue to evolve. But certainly would love to hear from the education community, take a look at the criteria, tell us what we're missing. Let us know. We can work with students with disabilities, the departments, or ERGs, as Dan mentioned, and try to address whatever gaps or barriers exist still. So that is something that is definitely on our roadmap.
Give me the share, make me the host.
Okay, we're at technology, right? Any questions? Any
I'm a lefty,
thoughts so
see
far?
how
While Dan is trying to address this technology thing.
Yeah, there's a question.
Where are we?
Hello.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Leslie. I am
Oh,
interested
Okay, I'll have to open a new window.
how, and I'm very interested in looking at your tool on AAP, but I am wondering
I don't know
about
what's
the
happened to my,
tips or how you make, what
Okay, I'm
would
gonna
be the
stop the
best
screen share.
approach to go to organizations and request that they improve their accessibility, how you reach out to them. And I am specifically concerned about government websites, and I'm also concerned about the election information on government websites,
I was
as
trying to
that's of
bring this
special
screen up.
interest to me. So my question is, I'm not sure, although I'm going to read through your documents,
Go back.
about the best ways to approach those election websites, as in how to request that they make improvements. I do accessibility testing myself, so I was going to test the website and then ask them to make improvements. Do you have any guidance or suggestions about how to influence organizations
That's
like
not the-
that to improve their
Oh, I see.
accessibility?
Oops. There we go. Yay!
Mike, hello.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Leslie, thank you so much for your question. Specifically on elections, voting, we don't have anything that speaks to that directly, because when we talk to businesses, they don't really talk about elections or voting, right? Having said that, I know that there, if you reach out to me after this session, like in Canada, I know we've done a lot of work in regards to accessible elections, and we have standards around that we can definitely point you to. The idea here, and how do you get this to leadership so that they understand this is important, they need to do it? Some of the criteria that we have in this program speak specifically to leadership, and how you make sure that leadership understand accessibility, included in their roadmap, included in their strategies, included in their budget, and so on and so forth. So what we've heard from organizations, when we work with a large organization who comes back to us and said, my executive leader doesn't, like, he kind of nudges his head, nods his head, he says, yeah, okay, whatever, but he doesn't really get it, or she doesn't really get it, they don't get it. What can I do? And when they used they showed them some of the criteria that were part of this program, they got it. It sort of brings them to understand that there's a reason why accessibility is important and you need to do it, and it's beyond the compliance. So some of the resources that are part of this program will be, in some cases, videos of people with disabilities accessing some websites and demonstrating some of the challenges that they have. There's always the financial business case that's always there for people in companies who are thinking about it from a return on investment. How much, is this going to cost me? So there are some resources there that can guide you to have those conversations. And what we're going to do as this program matures, there's going to be some webinars that we're going to, put together to help have some of those conversations.
Pina, could I add something or two? So one thing is that if it's a accessibility of voting system issue, the young lady in the center row, third down with the red hair is the person to call. And soon there will be a lawsuit filed to ensure accessible voting. Eve Hill.
You can't promise that.
I used to do it, but Eve does it better. File those lawsuits and win them. But I did want to mention before we got much further, in addition to the criteria and the resources, there is a maturity model that's mapped to these criteria. So if the organization is relatively unsophisticated, there's the opportunity to do that. In addition, there's some hours of program coaching that come with it as part of the deal. Also, there is now, as a result of our having piloted this, there is now an ability to save the criteria that you want to work on to My Saved Criteria with room for notes and status update, whether just getting started or whatever, so that you can keep track of your progress on the ones that you want to work on. Because sometimes they'll leap categories. It'll be a related criteria from another topic that's part and parcel of the ones that you select. And it's a lot to wade through. So being able to save the criteria are also part of this.
Yeah, we didn't get a chance to really show a lot of the functionality, but you can sort and you can find information using keywords. As we mentioned, you can do it through a role base. If you're in HR, what do you need to know all about, responsibility for HR? Or what is it that I want to know from HR and policies only, for instance, so you can actually filter the information. But I want to go back to your question, Leslie, for a moment, because to me, this whole conversation about elections and voting machines and websites for voting also comes back to the design criteria that we spoke about earlier, making sure that, when they design these machines, right, those functional requirements, those accessible requirements are there. And right now, they're not, and if they are there today, they're not validated by persons with disabilities, so you continuously have these issues with products and voting machines that are not necessarily accessible, right? Or they tend to do focus on people who have visual disabilities and forget all about the other disabilities. And cognitive disabilities is a big one. A lot of the challenges when it comes to disabilities are related to people with cognitive or learning or a combination of, and they're not doing enough testing when it comes to those types of disabilities. So I think, it's really important, for them to have those functional requirements, engage with the right people, and test throughout the process to make sure it's accessible, right? So whether you're working for the government or you're working for an organization, if you follow those processes, if you have those policies, you should be in good standing. Are you always going to have, are you going to get it right for everybody? Probably not. There's always going to be a need for accommodations, right? But at the end of the day, you try to do the best you can by engaging persons with different types of disabilities to make sure you capture as many possibilities as possible.
And it's particularly urgent in the state of Texas where we are, because it's now a crime to assist anybody with casting their ballot. So if it's not accessible, you're disenfranchised. And for those who are newly disabled, they're really going to be in a fix because they won't have learned how to master assistive technologies. But
one of the categories we have is AI, and I don't want to go too much into it, but I know that AI is playing a big role in a lot of this work that we're doing. This tool is not generated by AI. This tool is generated by people with disabilities. But I think going back to this whole conversation about technology is evolving so rapidly, and the next generation's expectation is so different, right? And I think that as we opened this session and Dan said, you know, it took 30 years to whatever, it took 30 years to develop WCAG standards, I think too, by the way. You know, we don't have the luxury anymore of taking long to develop things. We've got to be much more proactive. We have to be much more, you know, faster in what we want and what we expect. But I think that, you know, we have opportunities through tools for many people to get better at this. And we've learned a lot over the last 30 years. I feel that, you know, there are no excuses. Companies have no excuses, really, not to make things successful. Will they finally? Yeah, you can say they will. They'll try. But the reality is that really there are no excuses for not making things successful.
I need to pass the mic. Yes, Leslie.
So I'm a Texan myself. Are you a Texan?
I was for many years.
Okay, so the government website that is votexas.gov, which is the most up-to-date information about voting, says that assistance is permitted under the law. Now, there was a bill that was attempting to prevent some of that, but the current laws state that a voter may be assisted by any person the voter chooses who is not an election worker. So, but they may not be assisted by their employer, an agent of their employer, or an officer or agent of their union. And the person assisting the voter must read him or her the entire ballot unless the voter asks to have only one part of the ballot read. The person assisting the voter must take an oath that he or she will not try to influence. In other words, that information is out there, but there was a bill that attempted to take that away.
I appreciate the
Just wanna
correction
say
very much.
currently
No,
in
thank you.
existence.
Thank you.
You never know in Texas, okay?
Thank you. And then we have a question over here. I'm very glad, by the way, to see you also engaged with this.
I'm Lori Strauss. I'm with the AARP, and this has been a fabulous presentation. I might be jumping ahead, but I'd love to learn more about how we access the tool, the process.
So I'll answer because Pina doesn't have the mic. AARP is a member, as I recall, of IAAP. I'm pretty sure, isn't it, Pina?
I think so.
You don't think so? Okay.
I don't think so. But
Okay. Can I hand you the?
Yeah.
But for a member, there's a fee for not-for-profits of, I think, $3,500. Is that correct?
Yes.
It gives you a year's access to it. And I know I've talked to Shira about this, just so you know. Shira Waxlag, isn't she? No, wait a minute.
there's a lot of people in here.
Okay, all right. And Rebecca Rogers, who's now AARP Foundation,
Yes, I know Rebecca.
Rebecca has actually helped with looking at some of the emergency management criteria.
Great.
Yeah, so, yeah, reach out to me or Dan directly. We can set up another demo with your team. We can talk about it, but it's the $3,500 for not-for-profit gives you the one-year subscription. It gives you the 5 hours of coaching that we spoke about earlier, and unlimited access to all of the criteria, right? So a number of you, I think it's up to 10 members, unlimited access to all of the criteria for that year. And we can help you, navigate if you want to focus on a specific area or you want to have access to all of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'd love for it to be free. We'd love for it to not be behind a paywall. I have been doing this as a volunteer, but IAAP has spent, I don't want to ask them how much, with Pina and Sam Sunderman putting all this onto the Salesforce platform, and Robert Baker, after he retired from the government, helping to corral and curate resources. They've spent a boatload of money, so at least for now, we have to charge. And companies, of course, value it more if they have to pay for it. Yes, sir.
Is the associated maturity model also behind the paywall?
So the question is the associated maturity model behind the wall? Yes, it is. It is as well. And that too, there's no flat rate for that. It really depends on your organization, the size of your organization, the level of it. So when we do the maturity model, we do a discovery meeting first and have some conversations with you as to where you're at and so on. And from there, we assess the needs and develop a plan as to how we approach the maturity model for your specific organization and what that cost might be. But we can talk more.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. There are maturity models out there more and more now. You're going to see many of them. I'm very, very engaged with maturity models. There are some that are out there that you can self-assess. What we find is that self-assessing is very different than having conversations with organizations and their teams, and really getting that, as Dan put it, that authenticity when we speak about, to people about what's really going on behind the walls, right? So our approach to maturity model is very interactive, and it's very, it's through interviews with a number of organization departments and people within to get that real current state and provide you some guidance as to how to move from one level of maturity to the next. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, what I want to know from you all, because you're all, yeah?
I was raising my hand, but if you have more things to go, we can discuss.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
FYI, that mic is picking up people for captioning.
Okay.
All the
I
way
noticed
from
that too.
back to the room.
It might just be a really good mic.
Yeah. You've covered every part of the baseball field possible with this. It's a great job. And the details about every move to make, whether it's a foul ball or whatever, people can follow this really well. I think, if I may, it could be helpful in folks knowing how to get this kind of into a distilled version for smaller organizations and coaching on that. So, for example, we do a lot of work with municipalities in Canada and Ontario. And a municipality in Ontario could range from Toronto, with supposedly one of the top 3 populated places, depending on how they count it, to a place like Prince Edward County, with a larger geographical area, but much, much smaller, I think 20,000 in the population. So you can imagine municipalities that's set up, it's going to be really different. Like one person could be covering 16 of the criteria, right? So how to get, getting some coaching, getting some help on that could help this tool with especially smaller organizations. So.
Thank you. Great question. Actually, we are working with a number of, what do we call them? Self-starting companies?
Oh, startups.
Startups. We're working with a number of startup companies to see how we can distill this a little bit to respond to their needs. So maybe that's definitely something we can consider as well as a different scenario. Excellent. Any questions? Any other feedback? No?
Yes.
Yeah, one more?
Here. I'll take the mic and hand it over.
I was going to say, where's our runner?
So I just had one kind of thought, which is, I think where most colleges and universities in the U.S. right now is trying frantically to get ready for the Title II deadline next year, so teaching every faculty member how to make a header, right?
Right.
Where I would like us to be is looking at the criteria criteria and looking at, yeah, I like we were talking about the kind of role-based activities, right? And integrating that into our curriculums, right? Because what I see really often is we have companies hire people and then have to do the accessibility training once folks have been hired, as opposed to making sure that when we're training, you know, and teaching our students, that they're getting those skills initially, right, at the colleges and universities, and that everyone who comes out knows how to, you know, work in an accessible world. And so to me, that's a really big gap that exists, and the current compliance isn't doing anything to close that gap, right? And so I think it's a partnership that I think could be really fruitful, right, between the business community and the education community, to make sure that basically it'd be a lot less work for the business community to not have to do as much training, right, if that was built into the curriculum from the beginning.
I think that's a wonderful point. And I think going back to the project I was talking to you about before, faculty has a huge role to play in accessibility, right? One of the things that we're finding in many
I'm holding the
universities
mic for you. There you go.
is that universities hire what we call associate faculty, right? Not necessarily tenure, full-time, whatnot, and therefore
Adjunct in the
they're
US.
Adjunct, right? So they're contracts, they're contractors, right? And what's happening, and one of the things that we're saying is that perhaps there's a need to do two things. One is to make sure that your adjunct contractors understand their responsibility to inclusive and accessible education, right? If they're going to teach, they need to know about this, to your point, right? Second thing is, what we've heard from adjunct faculty is that frequently there's an expectation for them to take these mandatory courses on making sure they do their content accessible and blah, 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 but they don't get paid for it, right? There's just an expectation that they do this, and the training isn't mandatory in many cases. So we're trying to build practices or trying to promote practices such as, you know, there is also training for adjunct and faculty. Contracts need to have requirements for accessibility and inclusive learning, because if they don't, then there's never going to be a change, right? And I think that the tools, we talked about the tools way back when, faculty, there was a reason faculty not knowing what to do accessible content, but today it's so much easier, and they should, there's a responsibility, you know, as me, as an employee with a disability, I have a responsibility to make sure that I continuously evolve my training. The adjunct faculty or the faculty has that same responsibility. And I think we've been too lax on that, to be quite honest. And that's just my opinion. Dan, you're the education.
No, I think what you said was excellent, and I don't know what she's doing in retirement, but if I were you, I might call up Cheryl Pruitt, who did this for 20 plus years for the whole Cal State system. So she was faced with trying to corral faculty and staff into accessible communications at all of their campuses. I would have jumped off the tallest building long before, but she somehow continued to do it year after year. So she would have an encyclopedic knowledge, at least of what doesn't work, and might save you some agony. And if she asks why you call, just blame it on me. And I'll buy her a drink at the next enabling conference. But no, she really is sort of the most knowledgeable, I think, on this issue, because it really was an impossible task that she was given to do.
Anything? I'd love to invite you all to, you know, think about this tool more, right? If you want to see it, please reach out to us. We can go through it again. What I'm looking for is really some ideas as a project lead with Dan. What I'm looking forward is really to how can we best this how can we best use this tool, this program, to, you know, to make it more visible? Will it help your organization, as an example? Those are the questions I'd like to hear from you, if you have a few moments, and certainly, you know, want to take that back and see how we can get this out to market as quickly as possible.
I do think our next step may be, if we can rustle up some grant money or whatever, is to create training videos to support these criteria, in which each category is discussed at length, so that we can propagate this information more broadly. Yes, sir.
Is there any consideration in putting some, oh, I'm sorry. Has there been any consideration in putting any of this into the public domain, making it more available to the non-IAAP professionals who would really, you know, executives and things like that? Because there's probably a lot of valuable information. I haven't seen the maturity model. I don't know how that maps to some of the other ones, but, you know, having all this criteria out there for somebody to consider would be very useful.
We love it. And the problem is just the amount of treasure that IAAP has spent to date needing to be recovered. But in terms of the maturity model, and Pina, correct me if I say this wrong, but traditionally maturity models have been digital maturity models. And this maps to a lot of criteria that have nothing to do with digital media. And that's really what distinguishes it from DQ's maturity model or level accesses or for that matter, W3 YCAG maturity model, is that this isn't, and you'll have noticed with the criteria, the references to particular disabilities are very rare in here, because they're really meant, it's shocking, but there aren't consultants out there right now, or consulting companies, that cover digital accessibility, facility accessibility, emergency planning accessibility, event accessibility, and I'll say in this room, I'm hoping that, you know, McKinsey doesn't say, oh, we can do all those things. We'll be the consultant that will do this. It's an interesting gap in the accessibility consulting world that it doesn't cross boundaries.
Yeah, and you're absolutely correct. And that's one of those the distinctions, right, with this program, is that it's across enterprise. It's not just digital. Not gonna lie, the digital criteria or set of criteria is much more expensive in this tool because of the nature of the IAAP's world and so on, but it does cover all aspects of an organization, so at least we try to cover as much as we can. Yeah. But I will take you're making it to the public advice more and take it back for sure. We know it will. Like, we know that this could really be helpful to non-IAAP members. We actually have spoken about making it available to non-IAAP members, and we are looking at what that could look like. So it's not something that hasn't crossed our minds, or we've explored it. It's definitely on the table for discussion.
I actually think if you look at the site right now, there are ways to purchase access
without being a member.
Without being a member.
Yeah.
But it's probably cheaper to be a member and pay
Yes.
than not.
Yep. Okay. Any other thoughts? I know we're the barrier between this and lunch, Dan.
Wait a minute, did you have another question, sir?
No.
Oh, okay.
We're holding up people for
Well,
lunch.
thank you all for staying awake for all of this. It was a pleasure to talk with you all.
Thank you. you. Thank you, online.